Imagine a church wall at midnight. A wooden hatch turns with a soft thud. On one side, a shaking hand. On the other, a baptismal font already waiting. You think this was mercy? Think again. In late medieval Italy, hospitals built foundling wheels so mothers could pass infants anonymously. Florence's Innocenti opened for newborns in 1445, while Rome's Santo Spirito kept a revolving hatch in its wall for centuries. Tokens, half-coins, ribbons, torn cloth, were left as claim checks. Wet nurses were hired by the hundreds. Mortality soared. Police and clergy tried to stop scams and trafficking. They failed. Tonight, we open the wheel. Let's start with a lie dressed as charity. A revolving drum in a church wall, Ruota degli Esposti, the wheel of the exposed, promised safety without shame. A mother placed the baby on a shelf, tugged a bell, and turned the wheel. Inside, a sister or porter lifted the child into the hospital's custody. In Rome, you can still see the wheel at Santo Spirito in Sassia. Its very ordinariness is the horror. A device as casual as a lazy Susan, built for the quiet transfer of human life. Florence's Ospedale degli Innocenti, dedicated entirely to foundlings, institutionalized the idea in 1445. Bring the newborns, and we will take them. The architecture itself, clean arcades by Brunelleschi, sold comfort while hiding costs. Milk, nurses, graves. The church's first act? Baptize. If the child's status was uncertain, canon law said to baptize anyway. That sacramental urgency made every arrival a soul to be recorded and a body to be budgeted. A mercy hatch or an assembly line? Here's the twist. Once the wheel existed, abandonment skyrocketed because anonymity scales, and the city ledger kept turning with it. Picture the workflow. The bell rings, a swaddled bundle arrives damp from the night. The clerk writes a new name, never the birth name, then rushes the child to the font. In medieval and early modern practice, baptism was a race against death. An abandoned infant, by canon, was to be baptized unless clearly proven otherwise. The ritual soothed theology and soothed donors, another saved soul. But it also laundered anonymity. The book now knew the child. Nobody else did. In Paris, similar mechanisms later clustered near Notre Dame, routing infants through the Hôpital des Enfants Trouvés. In Florence, Innocenti's registers filled with Innocenzo, Maria, and hopeful adjectives. The sacrament made them visible to God, but the ledger made them invisible to family. Modern ears hear compassion. Medieval administrators heard throughput. Each sprinkle stamped the child into an economy of milk, linen, oil, wages, and funerals. You think baptism ended the danger? The cruel math begins here. Christened or not, infants rescued from exposure still faced a gauntlet of disease, malnutrition, and indifference the moment the ink dried on their new identity. A mother might slip a scrap of fabric, a bent copper coin, a bead, or a ribbon into the swaddle, cut in half. The hospital sealed the token half inside the admission billet. The mother kept the mate. If fortune changed, she could match the halves and reclaim her child. It sounds tender. It was also bureaucracy at its bleakest. In Florence, the Innocenti later exhibited thousands of these tokens, so many that, in the 19th century, curators displayed them without noting whose was whose. In London, a century later, the Foundling Hospital made tokens standard practice. a system that satisfied both legal prudence and the sentimental tastes of donors. But the twist is brutal. Most tokens never matched again. They became a museum of heartbreak, receipts for hopes that never cleared. And in the meantime, tokens solved a practical problem for officials. They allowed anonymity on day one and a paper trail forever after. A ledger that converted grief into orderly files and, crucially, kept doors open for steady intake. Hospitals couldn't keep infants alive inside stone walls, so they exported them fast. Within days, Bailey, wet nurses, in surrounding villages took the babies into their own homes. The network was vast: contracts, inspection visits, monthly payments, penalties for neglect. In Florence, Innocenti was designed to send newborns out to nurses, then retrieve survivors for schooling years later. In Paris, the Enfants Trouvés operated as a redistribution hub: unweaned infants out to rural women, older children sent to satellite houses. It was foster care as logistics. Here's the irony. The very system meant to save lives outsourced the risk to the poorest women, often underpaid, sometimes nursing more than one baby at once. Chronic underfunding was routine. Wages lagged, milk thinned, and tiny bodies failed. Scholars following Spanish, Italian, and British records keep finding the same pattern: insufficient funds for nurses, high infant mortality, blame shifted downward. The wheel's quiet promise ended in a cottage where a woman juggled her own child and a stranger's, both hungry. When pay stopped at 18 months, many returns flooded back to the hospital, newly weaned, newly vulnerable. Compassion, commodified. Let's talk death. Even in ordinary families, 15th and 16th century child mortality was gruesome. Among foundlings, it could be catastrophic. London's 18th century parish figures record up to 86% dying in the first year for pauper infants. Foundling institutions across Europe struggled with similar ratios when funds, milk, or sanitation collapsed. In Florence, epidemics could spike death rates 5 to 10 times normal. In Paris, the very buildings meant for infants were repeatedly condemned as cramped and unsanitary, prompting yet another move, yet another cull. Administrators wrote pious minutes and struck committees. The dead kept winning. Here's the sick twist. High mortality perversely reassured some civic budgets. Fewer children surviving meant fewer decades of expense for schooling and apprenticeships. Charity could trumpet baptisms today and quietly bury the cost tomorrow. If you're wondering whether anyone felt shame, yes. But shame rarely balanced a line item. Wheels made abandonment invisible. Statistics made the aftermath unreadable. The Ospedale degli Innocenti was Renaissance Florence at its most photogenic. Brunelleschi's loggia, glazed terracotta babies in swaddling by Della Robbia, and an origin story rich patrons could love. The city's Silk Guild bankrolled a hospital devoted solely to newborns and foundlings, the first of its kind. It was a masterpiece of civic PR, a building that preached mercy with geometry. Inside, the records tell a colder story. The Innocenti opened in 1445 with 62 infants. Its mission quickly became an administrative art: naming, baptizing, dispatching, inspecting, paying. The iconography of innocence worked. Donors gave, artists decorated, and Florence congratulated itself. But Florence also outsourced its tragedy to hills and hamlets through the wet nurse chain. When famine, plague, or debt hit, the system buckled, and with it, the babies. The city's most beautiful building for children became a funnel. The wheel didn't look like a monster. It looked like a triumph, exactly how a system eats without being seen. Cross the Alps, and the pattern repeats with Parisian scale. For decades before formal royal charters, abandoned children were clustered near Notre Dame, shuttled between houses and hospitals. By the later 17th century, the Hôpital des Enfants Trouvés became a central clearinghouse. It bought buildings, merged rivals, and still ran out of space. The solution? Ship infants to wet nurses outside the city, file the paperwork, pray the coach didn't overturn. Conditions were so bad that authorities condemned their own facilities as cramped and unfit, then promptly rented more. Paris tried sobriquets, enfant rouge, enfant bleu, as if color could cover colic. The city's own reports read like bad theater: perpetual overcrowding, repeat relocations, enduring mortality. And what of the famed anonymity? Parisians later invented a more literal rotating tour in the wall, a cousin of Italy's wheel, promising discretion with a turn of the wrist. The result was predictable: more intake, more babies in motion, and a machine that ran hotter every time reformers tried to cool it. By the 18th and 19th centuries, France's tours d'abandon, revolving baby hatches, spread from Paris to provincial towns. They worked like revolving doors: deposit, turn, disappear, and they changed behavior. Anonymity didn't just shield shame, it created demand. Admissions soared into the tens of thousands annually. Did that stop infanticide? Maybe at the margins. Did it create a conveyor belt? Absolutely. Administrators discovered a vicious feedback loop. The more doors you cut, the more babies you captured. Critics begged for counseling and poor relief instead of indiscriminate intake. The state finally blinked. In 1863, France began closing the tours, replacing them with admissions offices where mothers could still surrender anonymously, but were also offered advice, aid, and a second thought. It took another generation to outlaw the revolving hatch entirely. By then, a century of bureaucracy had learned something terrible. Hardware can change morality. A city that builds a wheel is a city that budgets for abandonment. Whenever a city commodifies children, predators orbit. Paris learned that in 1750, when rumors convulsed the capital, children were vanishing from streets, supposedly snatched by police to feed hospitals, navies, or aristocrats' whims. It was a moral panic, and also a confession. Parisians already knew their city consumed children administratively. The rumor simply imagined a darker pipeline. Was there organized kidnapping? The record reads like fog, but the panic itself mattered. It forced authorities to defend and thus to reveal their child-handling apparatus. Elsewhere, baby farming scandals bloomed in the British Isles in later centuries, with paid carers starving infants for profit. Foundling hospitals everywhere struggled with unscrupulous intermediaries, forged tokens and returns timed to payments. The wheel's anonymity, so comforting to donors, offered cover to swindlers too. Cities tried decrees, parish inspections, informants. They never wrote a law against hunger. This is the uncomfortable truth. When the state automates abandonment, the market improvises what to do with the bodies. We focus on the hatch, but the real machine sat on a desk, the register. Every arrival earned a new name, often aspirational: Prospera, Benvenuto, Innocenza. The billet with the token half was sealed. Later clerks, drowning in paper, made brutal efficiencies. London's Foundling Museum admits that 19th century governors displayed tokens without recording which child they matched. In Florence, the Innocenti preserves cabinets of segni, the physical grammar of desperate love, now archivally detached from the children they were meant to restore. Bureaucracy saved souls on paper. It also shredded identities in practice. The ledger did not need a mother's memory to balance. It needed milk invoices and burial counts. The wheel is easy to hate. The book is harder because it looks like order. But it's the book that made forgetting scalable. Cynicism time. Why did city councils and confraternities keep funding wheels and foundling homes despite grim survival rates? 3 reasons: theology, security, and finance. Theology. Every baptized infant was a soul saved from limbo. Security. Fewer corpses in alleys meant fewer riots, fewer scandals, fewer sins on civic conscience. Finance. Centralizing abandonment simplified poor law costs. Instead of paying scattered parish doles, towns could funnel charity into one institution, cultivate rich donors with pretty chapels, and claim moral leadership. Meanwhile, the wet nurse system pushed daily risk onto rural women, where deaths happened far from city eyes. When epidemics hit Florence, mortality surged. When Parisian rooms cramped, nobody moved heaven and earth, just more infants. Reformers came and went. The wheel endured. Like any infrastructure, it built its own lobby. Builders, suppliers, clerks, inspectors, priests, nurses, all with salaries, however small, and reputations. Once you professionalize abandonment, dismantling it threatens livelihoods as well as illusions. That's the cruel economy behind the cradle in the wall. Enough ledgers. Listen for the hinge at midnight. Imagine a woman who cannot feed 2 mouths tomorrow. She's heard the sermons. Better a baptized life than a body in the river. She wraps a ribbon, tears it in half, and breathes on her child one last time, so he'll carry her warmth 5 minutes longer. Then the bell. Inside, a clerk chooses a new name she'll never learn. Historians remind us that many abandonments were temporary in intent. Tokens were promises of return. Cities claimed to offer that chance. But poverty keeps appointments better than hope. The wheel gave mothers a ritual of departure that felt like love. The city gave them a receipt. In the morning, the parish crowed about salvation. The wet nurse faced the crying. This is the hardest twist. For many women, the wheel was not cruelty. It was the only loving choice in a world designed to make motherhood unaffordable. The system exploited that love and called itself merciful. Technology pretends neutrality. A hatch is just wood and iron, but devices change behavior. France learned that when the tours d'abandon multiplied admissions, make abandonment easy, and you will get more of it. That's not ancient history. Modern baby boxes echo the same debate. Anonymity can save lives in the moment and still create a pipeline that absorbs poor women's children rather than funding poor women's lives. 19th century France finally closed the tours, pivoting to offices that paired surrender with counseling and aid. Italy abolished many wheels after unification. Policymakers noticed what donors missed. Every hatch is a moral lever. Turn it, and budgets, beliefs, and bodies shift together. Medieval cities cut holes in walls to solve a problem made by hunger and shame. Then they built systems to manage the results, and discovered that the wheel they carved wanted feeding. We can admire the compassion of baptism and the craft of a Brunelleschi loggia, but look at the throughput, and you'll see the truth. This was mercy engineered to be affordable, not mercy engineered to be rare. Let's step back to the first image. A hand, a wheel, a font. We've walked you through the entire apparatus, the engineering of anonymity, the rush to baptism, the tokens as broken promises, the wet nurse network as a fragile lifeline, the ledgers that sanitized loss, the scandals that flared when rumor finally matched reality's shadow. And every piece keeps repeating a single argument. Once you design a machine for abandonment, you must decide what kind of society you are engineering. The medieval and early modern answer was pious and practical. Rome's Santo Spirito kept its wheel. Florence built the Innocenti, elegant as a prayer and efficient as a warehouse. Paris consolidated infants into a central depot and later cut its own revolving doors. Baptize immediately, canon law demanded it for foundlings whose status was uncertain, and get the babies to milk before the night's chill finished what poverty began. The sacrament did what sacraments do, confer a meaning greater than the individual. The ledger did what ledgers do, confer a category greater than the person. Between those acts, a child became both saved and administratively swallowed. Here's the uncomfortable math. Measured in souls, the system looks luminous. Measured in bodies, it looks like triage at scale. Cities learned that a hatch in a wall changed mothers' choices. France learned that a rotating drum in the facade changed statistics across an entire country, until the state finally closed the tours and replaced them with offices that could offer counsel as well as custody. But even closure confesses a truth. The demand didn't vanish. It flowed into other channels: parish relief, private baby farming, or the quiet calculations of families who kept their infants and slid into hunger instead. Technology and policy are never answers by themselves. They are levers. What they move depends on what you fund. What about intentions? The doctors, sisters, and clerks inside these institutions were not villains. Many nursed through the night, buried with dignity, and tried to chase payments into the countryside to keep milk flowing. Wet nurses were not parasites. They were survival's last subcontractors, often underpaid and blamed when starvation, funded by city budgets, not personal malice, did its work. When epidemics hit Florence, the Innocenti's numbers spiked. When Parisian rooms overflowed, infants died harder, not because anyone desired it, but because architecture and accounts receivable outran mercy. A sick child does not care if the benefactor's heart was pure. The crisis isn't intent, it's structure. If you're looking for a moral, it's this: charity must be designed against its own unintended incentives. The wheel was merciful in the single case. The mother with no options tonight. Scaled up, it became something else. A policy device that normalized surrender, institutionalized anonymity, and outsourced risk to the hungriest women in the countryside. Administrators baptized, named, and recorded because that's what order requires. But order without investment is cosmetic. Baptism without bread is a liturgy of attrition. And the tokens? Those half-hearts in drawers at the Innocenti and in London. Their tragedy is not only that most never matched again. It's that their very existence reassured institutions that they were offering a path back, even as everyone knew poverty almost never allowed it. The paper door remained open. The street outside did not. Tokens were receipts for a hope subordinated to a system. Where does that leave us? with a question at the hinge. Imagine you stand at the wheel. Your city has money for a beautiful loggia, and for clerks, and for bells. Do you fund wheels or wages? Do you multiply hatches, or multiply stipends for mothers to keep children? France's 19th century pivot, closing tours and opening counseling offices, hinted at an answer. Address the crisis before the hatch. That's the deeper lesson buried in medieval brick. Not that the church wall was cruel, but that it was insufficient by design. We opened with a quiet turn in the night. Let's close with a quieter image. A woman who kept the ribbon half, folded it into a bodice pocket, and never came back. Not because she forgot, but because she couldn't afford to remember out loud. Somewhere in a museum case, her half rests with thousands of others, proof that love survived the wheel even when children did not. If this haunted you, good. History should. Now tell me, which part shocked you most? The hatch, the book, or the budget? And which wheel are we still feeding today? If you want more dark, document-rich dives into the machinery behind mercy, subscribe, hit like, and share this episode. Next time, we'll pull back the curtain on another kindness that turned cruel when scaled. Comment below, should a city ever build a wheel?